If these things are true, if animism is true, if this kind of Shintoistic worldview is true, there is only this sort of experience of life. There's nothing that's coming to give you real wisdom from the outside. There's no truth, as it were, to be communicated, which is a profoundly different perspective on the spiritual realm than, obviously, a Christian worldview.
Hello and welcome to Popcorn Parenting, the podcast about movies, mythology and the Messiah, or in the case of today's movie, sisters, spirits and slow-paced film making. We'll be getting to that in a moment, but first I am joined by Reformed mythologist Morgan Locke. Hello Nate, how you doing?
Hello James, I'm very well, and I'm particularly excited to be talking about today's movie, My Neighbour Totoro.
Indeed. You've got a slightly gravelly tone there because you've got something in your voice, but it makes you sound even more authoritative, Nate,
Does
as
it?
if that were possible. Yeah.
Yes, no, slightly gravelly throat, slightly blocked nose. But let's not get into that. Let's get into the heart of this movie.
Yes. So, cold hard facts about My Neighbour Totoro. Listeners are already just thinking, My Neighbour Totoro? What? It's on Netflix, if you have Netflix, along with many other films from the legendary Studio Ghibli. My Neighbour Totoro is a movie from 1988. We won't do the maths on how long ago that was. And it took $41 million at the box office. Since then, in addition to generating approximately $277 million from home video sales and $1.4 billion from licensed merchandise sales, that's quite a lot of money for a very strange and enchanting movie that we'll get onto in a moment. It is written and directed by Hayao Miyazaki, and he has created other hits that you may have heard of, like, for example, Castle in the Sky, which I've mentioned before, Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle, Princess Mononoke, Kiki's Delivery Service. So these are quite a phenomenon, aren't they, Nate? So why don't you, in a way, maybe give us an inner world of Studio Ghibli. This is very unfamiliar to us. Full disclosure, I just sat down with my kids and say, we're going to watch a movie. You don't have to watch it if you don't want to. I'm recording a show with Nate. They were up for it. Yep. They made it to the end and thought it was delightful and enchanting. They had no idea what they'd just seen. We had a bit of a chat about it. But overall, we enjoyed it. So set the scene for us in a world.
So, Studio Ghibli or Ghibli, there's some debate around exactly how you pronounce it, but it's a Japanese animation studio, and Hayao Miyazaki he's the guy behind the whole thing, and the hits that you've just mentioned are all weird and wonderful films, and he has a kind of magic touch when it comes to showing you very simple and yet very strange stories. Common features of Studio Ghibli are food. That plays quite a big part in other films, not so much My Neighbour Totoro, but in others. Flying and flying machines is like a big kind of theme within it. But also
Castles in the Sky has got a lot of flying in it, which I really love that. And
the other thing is, yes, they're usually about young girls. So that's a kind of typical Miyazaki protagonist is a girl aged between sort of 7 and 15 or something. And they just have, I think, quite a spellbinding quality to them. Not just in the stories, but in the storytelling, in the animation. Basically, the reason why I thought we should watch My Neighbour Totoro and discuss it is because my brother, when we first started doing Popcorn Parenting, he was on at me to say, you need to do something on a Studio Ghibli film. And I said, all right, okay, I'll get around to it. And we put it off for various reasons. I thought, I do want to get around to one. And My Neighbour Totoro, I think, is probably the most accessible. And it has produced, through the main King Totoro character, it has given Studio Ghibli their mascot. So King Totoro is to Studio Ghibli what Mickey Mouse is to, Disney. But My Neighbour Totoro itself is a story about two sisters and their dad moving into a new house to be closer to their mum, who's been in hospital for some time. The film takes place in around about 1955, if you sort of looking at some of the things outside the film that Miyazaki's talked about. And it's rural Japan, and it's all the better for that because it's slower paced and it's the exploration of a new and old, of an old house which is new to you, gives you opportunities to explore. So Satsuki and Mei are these wonderful characters who just effervesce in the beginning of the film, just running around being children. And their relationship is the primary thing that's going on. Satsuki goes off to school and Mei is just hanging around the house. And one afternoon, Mei finds herself exploring around a camphor tree, which is in the grounds of the house that they just moved into. And she chances upon this gigantic animal, mystical beast called Totoro, who's like a great big kind of bunny rabbit cat.
It's like she's led there, isn't it? Because there's a little one and then there's a bigger one, and she follows them and into this sort of underground in the middle of a tree lair, and then there's a big one there. Yeah,
she's sort of investigating around the house whilst her dad's working, and she's just being kind of busy. And then she goes off to explore, discovers these little Totoros, and then the big one, and then she has a little nap. And then when she wakes up, it's all disappeared, and no one's quite sure whether to believe her or not.
So Sisters is the first of our three headings, and we've already started a bit about that. Do you want to say any more about Sisters? Because it feels like a really nice and not antagonistic relationship. It feels quite refreshing in that sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, I suppose part of the reason why I was excited, in a sense, for you to see it with you having your girls, is that whilst I don't think this is reflective of all, all sorority, as it were, there is something very, very adorable about the way in which Satsuki and Mei relate to each other, which doesn't necessarily need to be sisters. They could, it could be brothers, or it could be a brother and a sister. The gentle way in which they play together, I just think is really delightful. And I think there is a depiction of childhood in this film, particularly in the opening scenes, which feels incredibly authentic and incredibly well observed. So if you take Mei's sort of opening lines, if you just sort of extracted them from the script, what you find is that all she does is to repeat something her older sister just said. So her sister will say, "Oh, fish." And she'll be like, "Fish." And then she'll be like, "Oh, a tree, a tree." So she's mimicking and just sort of joining in with what her older sister's doing. But then also she just keeps shouting, "Wait for me!" because they're always running. They're running around the house, they're exploring, they're excited.
Yeah.
It's just really beautiful and feels very wholesome when we're so conscious of kind of these very heavy, psychologically driven stories that we're conscious of. It just feels very sweet.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, is that a talking point for our kids, in terms of how they get on with their siblings? I mean, it feels we're in danger of just getting into moralism or that awful parenting thing, which is, why can't you be more like those two? Which just doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about discussing the relationship between Satsuki and Mei, because that is the primary relationship in the story. So the lowest point in the story is when Satsuki and Mei are mean to each other. And so Satsuki just says to her, "You're such a baby, just grow up." And Satsuki's upset because her mother isn't going to be able to come home from the hospital that weekend. So she's stressed out.
Yeah.
And May wants to be involved. She doesn't want to be left behind. And Saskia just loses patience. And she just says, just grow up. And that provides the drama, which is largely lacking in this film. It provides the point of conflict, which then can be resolved with a 12-legged cat boss towards the end. So I think the relationship between the sisters is the key element and the key relationship in the story. And that's weird, actually, because in the development of the story, I think Miyazaki had only written one character in, who was a kind of combination between Saskia and May, but then realized that he needed some tension, or needed to have sisters relating to each other for the story to kind of make sense. And so he then divided them up. So,
and in a way, the movie, moving it on to the next one, the movie has to be about the sisters, because we get onto Spirits, our second S. There isn't really any skepticism in this movie. It's not really like one of them can see something and the others say, no, you can't, it's silly. Yeah. That beat is resolved very quickly. Yeah. And when it turns out that both sisters kind of have that experience, or, you know, when the dad is brought in on it, he's like, oh, you've met the tree spirits. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, they show themselves to you sometimes. Yeah. Let's go up there and say hello or shout.
Yeah.
And there's no telling people off for believing in fairies. It's just, this is how it works. It's kind of really interesting, really.
Yeah, and I think it is. And maybe it's just because it's a Japanese film. And so you don't have the same secularism and suspicion and skepticism that you would have in a Western film. So the classic story of a child saying, oh, I just saw this thing. And then no one believes them. You know, so Lucy goes through the wardrobe, and of course they're like, stop being silly now, Lucy. And that conflict of not being believed, and then Edmund joining in and him discovering it, and then him refusing to acknowledge that it was true, makes him a real beast. But because, as you say, the dad says, oh the spirits, we should go and chat to them, shouldn't we? You think, well, hold on, like that's a major plot point in so many of our stories about encounters with the supernatural, the spiritual, is that you're not supposed to be believed. So it does feel a little bit unnerving to sort of go, oh, everyone just believes them. I think the biggest challenge with the spirits, or the spirituality of My Neighbour Totoro, is just how capricious or almost indifferent the spiritual realm is. So I think at some point their dad says, if they decide you're nice people, they won't harm you. Or right now they don't want to be seen. And you think, well, if there's this spiritual realm that has the power to solve your problem, Saskia is only able to find May because she calls on King Totoro, and King Totoro calls forth the cat boss, and the two of them together then go off and find May. If there is this spiritual realm with the power to save you, but it basically doesn't care, it's not interested. It might be interested, it might not be. That is a recipe for real anxiety. Like, if they decide you're nice people, they won't harm you. Well, what do you mean, if they decide I'm a nice person? What if they don't think I'm a nice person? What can I, so there's nothing within the story itself that gives you any way of engaging with the spiritual realm other than, well, we could try.
Because again, there's another version of this movie, another Western version is, there are these spirits and they're indifferent, but they have to help you if you get the magic amulet and rub it on a full moon. A bit like Turning Red. Full moon, you do the dance, you sing the song, you say the thing, and the power is released, it has to be, that's an immutable law, and
Yeah.
even the spirits can't change that. Whereas this is much more low-key engagement with the spirit world, but not particularly... Yeah, there's no forcing of their hand or anything, is there?
Yeah. In one sense, I mean, we'll talk about this when we talk about slow-paced filmmaking, but because these spirits, whether dust sprites or tree spirits or whatever, because they don't speak in a kind of in a way that people could comprehend. They don't have wisdom for you. They don't have a voice, and there's no revelation that comes from the spiritual realm other than the way that they act. And occasionally they'll act in a way that says, be more chill, it's fine, everything's okay. Or they'll act in a way which is, we're now going to start doing a funny dance around to help your acorns to grow into oak trees. They don't have anything to say, as it were. So I think from that point of view, on a spiritual level, you think, well, I find that quite worrying. If these things are true, if animism is true, if this kind of Shintoistic worldview is true, there is only this sort of experience of life. There's nothing that's coming to give you real wisdom from the outside. There's no truth, as it were, to be communicated, which is a profoundly different perspective on the spiritual realm than obviously a Christian worldview.
I mean, so the obvious question is here that there may be some Christian parents just thinking, well, this all smacks of paganism, and what do we do with those kind of concerns, that they're worshipping supernatural creatures or interacting with them, and they're not Jesus and they're not angels. So what are they? What is this?
Yeah, I think there's a good question there around if you're worried about the threat of animism for your children and the possibility that there might be a genuine issue with your children finding everything to have a spirit which must be sort of respected and acknowledged, then yeah, steer clear of the film. There's no need to watch every movie. But I do think there's an opportunity for a conversation about animism, about the idea that, well, are there spirits in the dust? Are there spirits in each tree? What's a Christian way of understanding the created world around us? Why do we think that the philosophy portrayed in this film, the worldview that's given in My Neighbour Totoro, if we find it isn't enough, why isn't enough? What questions do we have off the back of that film? And a significant one would be the fact that Mei and Sasuke's mother is sick, and how they deal with that, how they deal with the disappointment. The granny's belief that if Sasuke's mother ate these vegetables, she'd be fine. It's a strange thing to say to a child, a level of confidence that if someone just eats the right food, that they'll be okay. Well, there's more going on. I think it's a great opportunity for those kinds of conversations, if that's where the conversation goes with your kids.
Yeah, helpful. I mean, overall, we live in such a rationalistic world that the idea that people might dare to believe in spirits is kind of a nice problem to have. It's just a question of focusing that on Jesus Christ and, the heavenly realms. Let's keep it moving on to the final one, which is slow-paced filmmaking. Let's get quickly to slow-paced filmmaking, Nate.
Yeah, just tell me a bit about your thoughts on that. What was it like watching the film with the girls? Did you feel the sense that this was taking a while to get going?
It was really interesting because although it is slow dramatically at the start, not much happens. There is an awful lot of running around and exploring.
Yeah.
And then you get the mystery of... I thought they were cockroaches when they walk into a room and it's full of these little black things that suddenly disappear. And so that kind of keeps you going, really. And you are wondering, who is this? Where are we? What's going on? There's just enough intrigue to take you through. And then you get the little girls, becoming friends with Totoro and that discovery. And then you get the jeopardy and you're done. It's only 85, 86 minutes.
Yeah.
which suits us just fine. We like short movies. So it was nice to have a completely different pace of movie rather than the frenetic running around with explosions. We enjoyed the Mitchells versus the Machines or whatever it was called. Run over there, do this. The robots are taking over. Quick, now do this. Drive this car. Go over there, do that. I mean, that's fine too, but it was nice to have some counterpoint to that. And at the end of it, they kind of felt fairly warm and positive about the whole thing. But was slightly wondering what was that, because it was just so far away from what they're kind of used to, really.
Part of the reason I absolutely love, Studio Ghibli films, the ones that I've seen, is that it feels like a very different experience than watching most Pixar films, most Disney films, most DreamWorks films. It's that it's setting you into a different frame of mind and a different pace and a different experience. It's almost like being on a canal boat rather than a motorbike. Do you know what I mean? It's like most of the films, even if they're not kind of super crazy, just every 2 seconds there's some kind of manic explosion on the screen. I went to see, my daughter and I went to Space Jam 2, A New Legacy, simply because we hadn't been to the cinema together, just the two of us, for a long time, and she wanted to go to this early morning showing because it was only like $2.50 each or something. So I was like, all right, we could go. We'll have the cinema experience, but, this is not going to be Daddy's favorite movie. And it was the most exhausting, like visually, just the set, like so much is happening, right? It's just, it's Warner Brothers trying to get their characters back into people's imaginations so they can sell more product of whatever it is they've got. But it was so tiring. I had to close my eyes at various points because I was just like, I can't take all this visual stimulation in. And I can't believe this is good for anyone watching it. Whereas there's a YouTube channel which does film analysis on a kind of more technical level, cinematography and things. And the name of the YouTube channel is Every Frame a Painting. And I just think it's a brilliant title because I do think it sums up what it's like to watch a Miyazaki film. Every frame of My Neighbour Totoro would look gorgeous as just to have on the wall. It's beautifully painted, it's beautifully composed. The shifts between things are done at a reasonable, albeit, there's various wacky bits of, like I say, with the cat boss or whatever it might be, or in other spirited way can be quite kind of disconcerting to watch some of those scenes. But in My Neighbour Totoro, it's just really nice on the eyes to watch it. And the storytelling is being done with the visuals. They're letting the pictures do the work. And so much of what passes for, so much of the standard fare of children's films at the moment, animated films particularly, is that it's all of the movement with all of the dialogue and all of the music all of the time. So they can't just let you discover what's happening through the visual storytelling. They have to be commenting on it all the time. And usually with that kind of irreverent, slightly ironic Lego movie, Trolls, Mitchells vs. the Machines angle on everything, which after a while can just get quite draining.
Yeah, no, it is good. And so it's well worth it. And I mean, I have to say, I think the movie before this, Castles in the Sky, has got much more of an adventure sense to it. And it has got a science fiction quality, and there are flying machines and aeronautical pirates and that kind of stuff. So clearly this is a choice on behalf of the filmmaker. So, but yeah, it's none the worse for that. And again, it's worth just talking about how stories take their time, and actually we get used to the crash bang wallop of Disney Pixar or Warner Brothers or whatever, and that's not really how the Bible does story. The Bible reveals stuff quite slowly and introduces concepts and characters, and they come back later. We hear callbacks and references, and the whole thing unfolds quite slowly. So it is good just to get into that discipline of assessing what is this. Don't get angry that it's slow. Just realize that it's slow and recalibrate your body clock and your brain accordingly. So that's the thing that's worth doing. It's worth talking about. Why do you find this to be slow? Would you prefer it to be faster? Should all movies be fast? How fast is too fast?
Yeah.
Why do you want it to be fast? What else have you got to do?
Yeah. The thing I'd say on the Bible, is kind of goes without saying, but it's written, and it's written to be read, and films are obviously not written to be read, but written to be seen, and so film as a medium is designed to exist in time, right? So it's a temporal art form like music or dancing or something, whereas you've got the kind of the static visual arts, painting and sculpture and photography. And then you've got the written words. It is an experience that you take time to, it's sequential in the fact that you read from beginning of a sentence to the end. But the pace of the book is at some level determined by the syntax, but really you can slow it down or speed it up depending on how quickly you want to read it. Whereas film won't go any quicker if you can put it in. You can fast forward it if you want, I suppose. And Netflix have this weird feature where you can speed up watching a film, which seems weird. But it's at the discretion of the filmmaker how quickly you engage with something. I think one of the questions from a parenting point of view is to what extent do we feel able or free to determine the pace of the lives that our children live, and to what extent do we feel free or able to manage some of the pace at which our children engage with things. And if our film watching is determined by, well, what does my kid want to watch? What else have they heard people talk about? What is Netflix offering me right now? It will largely default to this kind of manic, like screen explosions and crazy soundtracks and ironic dialogue all the time. And that might actually be a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of the more you watch those kinds of films, the harder you find it to watch a slower paced film. And giving your children the experience of slowing it down a bit and saying, well, let's watch something just a little bit slower might actually be formative in the sense that your children are more comfortable or more capable of engaging with things in a more relaxed way. I don't want to get into the specifics of having children who, maybe are not, what's the phrase, neurotypical or something, and what they engage with. But to say that there is something slightly worrying about the amount of just fast-paced, don't think about anything, just move on to the next thing, don't worry about that, move on to the next thing, that is out there in the culture. And as parents, we have opportunity to curate our children's media experience in that way, not just in these are the websites you're not allowed to go on sort of thing.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think also we want to give them the best of the movies of the last 70 years, and they don't, and if we just let what's on now, what's Netflix giving me, then we are just going to give them the spirit of the age again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
And we don't believe in the spirit of the age. In fact, the spirit of the air, who is the king of this age, is the devil, and we're not on that team. So we want to be, going back to the C.S. Lewis thing, the breeze of the centuries. We want stories from past and present, and the really good stuff stands the test of time. So although movies can date, undoubtedly, there are still some ones that are very much of their time, but still very, very good. Mary Poppins being an obvious example of a movie that stands up really well. And actually Mary Poppins 2 is pretty good.
Was it though?
Yeah.
Wasn't it just exactly the same film with a...
Yeah.
Just...
Here's a movie my kids really like, and that is Singing in the Rain.
Ah, we've not watched that.
It's really funny.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to understand. It's about Hollywood going from silent movies to talkies. And so our hero, Gene Kelly, is playing opposite this lady in this movie that they're making. And they have to add a music. They have to add a talk track to it. But the problem is the lady looks great, but she sounds terrible. So, there are old movies like that are really good. And because they were made in the 40s or 50s or 60s, they probably got some fairly universal themes.
Yep.
So I think there's some really good stuff there. And obviously we've talked about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and stuff like that too.
Yep.
So, but there's probably more to do here, isn't there?
I think there definitely is. And as people, I think, are becoming, maybe just a bit disillusioned with Disney for whatever reason, if not partly just because it's a behemoth, right? It's just, is anyone else allowed to make animated films? Yes, they are. And there's some quite good ones. So I think having acknowledged and analysed lots of the output from the House of Mouse, I think watching this one again and trying to think it through has encouraged me to think, okay, maybe introducing some more hidden gems like we've done before could be a way forward. Yeah, let's reduce down our audience even further, James.
Well, you say that, but people are just wanting movie and book recommendations all the time because their kids consume something and then that's done. What, you've got a good movie, great, 2 hours, done. What else have you got?
Yeah.
And I have to say, I think TV is pretty bad these days for kids in terms of the stuff that's made that's 20 minutes long.
Right.
That when I was a kid, I was watching, I don't know, Rent a Ghost was slightly before my time and Maid Marian was slightly after my time. But children's telly, I think, is not really what it was. And so I think there's an opportunity for movies. Maybe we should lean into that a bit more. So we'll have a think about it. And if anybody has an amazing recommendation for us, then get in touch, popcornparenting@gmail.com and say, oh, you should do this movie or that movie.
And if you've got a conversation going with your kids after this, it may be that the slower pace thing is the thing that sticks out to them and that it feels like you're slightly battling with them to get watching this film because it's not just playing one of the most recent bangers that's been out from Bruno Mars or Dua Lipa or someone. And you feel like, I'm slightly anxious about forcing my kids to watch this, or they're slightly reluctant to watch it. That's a point of conversation. Just to say, what do we think about the pace of the things that we watch? How do we think that more fast-paced stuff might make us more impatient? How does the pace of the media we consume affect our expectations about how much will keep us entertained and how much stimulation we need? So I think even if you try to watch this and it feels like you have to turn it off after 20 minutes, I think that is it's a starting point for a conversation about the media that we consume. And then if you get into the stuff about the sisters, brilliant. You can talk about what it's like to have a younger sibling or an older sibling and the desire to catch up with them and how it breaks your heart when your older sibling says, grow up, I don't want to spend time with you. And then potentially you may get into conversation about animism and the spiritual realm and, the lack of revelation and interest in your salvation that these Totoro seem to have. But if your conversation only goes to any one of those levels, that would be a good thing, I think. it's an opportunity to spend time with your kids. And my hope, obviously, with a film like this is that it becomes a bit of a family favorite. I watched it again with my daughter the other day, and she just loves May. She just finds her hilarious. Just
yeah,
the way
she's a great character.
The way that she just determined to follow after her sister, or the way that she's drawn climbing the stairs or something. It's just things like that which are just really, really adorable. So hopefully family favorite, but do not panic if there's resistance.
Thanks very much, Nate.
Yes, thank you, James.
Speak to you next time. Cheerio.
Bye-bye.